She met my gaze and declared, "Our marriage has ended, instantly without conflict or warning." She stated it as if announcing the spoiled milk. I remained silent, refraining from questioning or contesting. Instead, I stood motionless in the kitchen as she passed me by, shutting the bedroom door behind her. That night, insomnia seized me. I spent hours on the couch, the muted television my only companion, staring blankly at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet save for the persistent hum of the heating vents, a noise that goes unnoticed until all else fades away. Around 2 in the morning, I rose restlessly. Perhaps it was an urge to move. In the entrance hall, Christine's coat hung by the door, worn earlier in the evening when she returned late from someplace, dropped her bag, uttered those 6 words, and vanished into the bedroom. I picked up the coat to hang it neatly in the closet. That was all, yet something felt weighty within the pocket. A mobile phone tumbled out and hit the floor, screen upwards. It was unfamiliar, dark casing, pristine condition, nothing displayed on its screen. I had never encountered it before. I picked it up. The screen illuminated with a chain of messages. The name at the top was Jace. The name was familiar. We all knew it. Standing in the hallway in my socks, holding an unclaimed phone, I read just enough to comprehend that my wife had been deceiving me for quite some time. The dates traced back months. The images left no room for denial. I placed the phone back in her coat pocket exactly as I'd found it. Then I returned to the couch and remained there until dawn seeped through the window. At 8, Christine left for work. I heard the bedroom door open, her presence in the kitchen for a short while. Finally, the front door clicked shut. I didn't stir from the couch. The store opened at 9. I contacted Danny to handle the morning shift, feigning illness. That wasn't entirely untrue. At the kitchen table, my untouched coffee grew cold as I pondered over what exactly I comprehended. She announced the end of our marriage without explanation or accusation, and without tears. Initially, I assumed she was simply tired. Perhaps this was something said in a moment of distress that would be retracted the next day. But Jace's name on her phone wasn't a fleeting emotion. It seemed to have been hidden in the depths of her coat for some time. I kept hoping there must be an undiscovered reason, a clarification that would make this less devastating than it appeared. Maybe the messages were outdated. Perhaps I had misinterpreted the dates in the dim light. Maybe, blindsided as I was, I had imagined details where none existed. By midday, I'd almost convinced myself of nothing, yet I remained unmoving. That evening, after she retired to bed, I returned to the hallway. The coat still hung on its hook. I extracted my phone from my pocket, illuminating its screen, revealing 2 fresh messages since the previous evening. I didn't immediately read them. Instead, I stood there, holding the device, staring at the glowing screen and convincing myself to return it to its place. I didn't need more information than what I already had. Yet I ended up reading them. They were brief. Jace inquired about her well-being, while Christine stated she had dealt with the situation. 2 simple sentences, but the word "dealt" resonated painfully within me. That was what I was, something she'd managed. Returning the phone to its place, I ventured to the kitchen, pouring a couple of fingers of whiskey without finishing it. Standing near the window, I watched a car creep down the frost-covered street below. The recurring thought that haunted me wasn't the messages. It was her composed demeanor when she said it. "This marriage is over." No trembling voice, no bloodshot eyes. She had made up her mind before entering through that door, perhaps weeks earlier. During dinner, she sat opposite me, acting normally, inquiring if I had contacted our landlord, yet she was already aware of what had changed. The unresolved aspect was that she knew. For the second night, we followed the same routine. She went to bed, I waited, then ventured to the hallway. I justified it as my last visit, seeking evidence to absolve me. Something that would clearly cast her as the villain so I wouldn't have to endure the rest. I scrolled through weeks of messages. Dates, specific locations, things she claimed to be doing but wasn't. On the 3rd night, I returned, and a new message greeted me at the thread's top that chilled me. Jace had sent it at 11:47 that evening, while Christine was asleep mere feet away from where I stood. It said simply, "Looking forward to Saturday." That was it, just 2 words. The date on the message was for tomorrow. I remained in the hallway for a long time after reading this. The coat remained hung, the phone clutched in my grip. The warmth pulsed via vents unabated. Mirroring its state 3 nights prior, everything around stayed unchanged. What differed was my depleted ability to offer alternate explanations. It wasn't old messages, it wasn't an issue settled long ago resurfacing. Instead, events were unfolding in the present and imminent future. She lay slumbering within our room as if a typical Thursday night. I considered rousing her. Stepping into our shared space, flicking on the light, placing the phone on the nightstand before her, waiting silently. A part of me yearned for confrontation, desired her to utter the words directly, to address me face to face without the sanctuary of a bedroom door. However, I resisted that impulse. I returned the phone to her coat pocket and settled on the couch in the dark. Insomnia gripped me. I merely sat there making a choice. By dawn's early light seeping through the blinds, my resolution was clear. It wasn't a spectacle. I knew precisely what actions awaited. It wasn't a physical altercation. It was something subtler. That's what made it difficult to rectify. I rose, retrieved her phone from her coat pocket, and deposited it on the kitchen table near her coffee cup. The tabletop center, her usual spot for breakfast. I activated the screen, scrolled through our conversation with Jace, and left it exposed. Upon donning my coat, gathering my keys, and exiting, I chose not to leave a note. Instead, I simply closed the door gently behind me and stood momentarily in our building's corridor, listening to the stillness beyond. It was early. The street was desolate and frosty. A typical January morning with biting cold air even before a few steps. I proceeded to the shop, unlocked it myself for the first time in days, switched on the lights, and began my work. I had 3 bikes awaiting repairs and 2 more requiring adjustments. I labored through the entire morning without pause. At 10 o'clock, Danny entered, glanced at me, then remained silent before departing to his workbench. I waited until noon before checking my phone, discovering 4 missed calls from Christine without any voicemails. A text followed, simply stating, "We need discussion." Placing the phone on the workbench, I picked up a wrench instead. I was already aware that "we need to talk" implied she'd been caught and needed assistance managing the situation. It meant she had a prearranged narrative ready for me to hear before I could ponder too much. I had heard her handle matters before. I knew how it sounded. However, I hadn't anticipated that 2 days later, when she eventually phoned while sobbing, I would decide to answer. The call came during a Sunday afternoon. I was at Danny's residence, having stayed on his couch since I left Friday morning. Saturday had passed without notice. I wasn't certain if she kept her arrangements with Jace or not. I hadn't asked, nor had she disclosed it. She was genuinely crying, not the controlled type accompanied by talking points. Her sleeplessness was audible. She mentioned that Jace was over, stating it was a prolonged error. She expressed her fear of losing everything. She requested a meeting just to converse, only coffee, in a public setting without any pressure. I pondered my response and eventually agreed. The encounter took place at an unfamiliar coffee shop on Clearwater, neither of us having visited together before neutral territory. Upon my arrival, she was there, both hands clutching a mug, her hair loose, no makeup. She appeared smaller than usual, which was unusual for me to observe. I sat opposite her, listening as she spoke at length about the genesis of their relationship, how she downplayed its seriousness initially, and ended up deeply involved before she knew how to extricate herself. She wasn't really making excuses, but describing the situation. Her words resonated, but not as intended. I was on the brink of agreement. I could sense my thoughts aligning with her narrative, but then her phone vibrated on the tabletop. She glanced at it swiftly before flipping it over, too hastily. Her hand remained motionless on the device, refusing to lift until later. When she did, she resumed her discourse as if nothing had disrupted the flow. I didn't utter a word. Instead, I stood up, donned my coat, and carried my coffee cup towards the counter, a habitual gesture when contemplating if my limbs would function normally. I put the cup down and exited. Her voice called out from the table. The chair moved backwards. I continued walking. Inside, it was frigid and vivid, casting an unforgiving winter light that accentuated every detail with stark clarity. For a brief instant, I stood on the sidewalk, then commenced my stride towards where I had left my vehicle, choosing not to glance back at the window despite an inner yearning. She contacted me twice before I reached my truck. I remained unresponsive. In the driver's seat, with the engine off, I spent a few tranquil minutes gripping the steering wheel, idly observing passers-by on the street as if it were an ordinary Sunday. That encounter would be the last time I set eyes upon her for a considerable period. Upon returning to Danny's, I shared the events with him. He responded tacitly by offering me a beer and restoring the game. I continued to watch it without absorbing any of its content. In that night, I executed a decision I had been postponing since the instant I discovered the phone on the hallway floor. Seizing my own device, I dialed a number I had recently researched but hadn't utilized thus far. The recipient was a family law attorney. I had chanced upon the number a few days prior, jotting it down on a receipt and tucking it away in my wallet. Each time I retrieved it, I hesitated before replacing it. Initially, I convinced myself I wasn't prepared and hoped the coffee meeting might alter something. However, nothing had changed, so I made a call to a woman who was composed and direct. She asked some fundamental questions, outlined the subsequent actions, and arranged a consultation for later in the week. The conversation lasted approximately 12 minutes. Upon hanging up, I waited for a significant emotion, but felt mainly fatigue instead. The consultation occurred on a Wednesday. Facing an attorney in a neat, silent office, I responded to questions, signed documents, marking the start of my marriage's legal dissolution. Returning to the shop afterwards, I completed a tune-up on a child's mountain bike and charged $60. He appeared pleased. During the first week, Christine persistently called. However, the frequency of calls decreased, then virtually ceased. My sister called me once urging reconsideration, mentioning Christine was in disarray, acknowledging people err. I played it once before deleting it. 10 days post Danny's place, I secured a one-bedroom flat about 2 miles from the store. Minimal decorations, second-hand sofa, single dish set. The apartment held an unprecedented silence. I began to believe the worst was over. One evening as I passed Halstead's venue, I noticed Jace's name on the marquee, slowed down unintentionally. His name glared from one of those black marquees with white plastic letters, a Friday night performance scheduled 2 weeks ahead. A sketch of his face was adjacent to it, promotional artwork. At the red light, I stared longer than necessary. The light turned green, drove on, convinced myself it held no significance. He was merely a name on a board, not the cause of our marital breakdown. He had been the destination where things went wrong. Christine made all her decisions independently. I was aware of that from the hallway onwards. Knowing and feeling are two distinct entities, and that entire evening in my fresh apartment, the TV humming in the corner, I mulled over going to see him. It's not something I'm proud of. I considered showing up unannounced on a Friday night and merely being present. However, this version doesn't offer much clarity about what transpired afterward. Undoubtedly, it wouldn't have been good. In the end, I didn't go. But the thought disturbed me for long enough. Instead, I contacted my elder brother Kevin in Columbus. We conversed for roughly an hour. He inquired sincerely about my well-being, and I confessed the reality, which was that some days were bearable while others found me awake at 4 a.m., unable to sleep. He listened without trying to resolve it. After our conversation, I felt slightly more composed, not restored, just more stable. The documents were progressing through their stages. Christine had ceased arguing, and then one particular afternoon, she dispatched a solitary text to my usual number. It merely read, "I apologize, Matt, I truly mean it." I scrutinized it thrice. Then I pocketed the phone and returned to my task, which was fine-tuning the derailleur on a road bike belonging to a man who commuted to work daily irrespective of the weather. A reliable machine, thoroughly used. It merely required maintenance. I didn't respond to Christine's text that day or the following one. On the third day, I drafted a reply twice and erased it both times. The initial draft was excessive. The second was frosty. I couldn't locate a version that was sincere without being either of those things. In the end, I opted not to respond at all, not as retribution, but simply because I lacked anything left to communicate that would have improved either of our feelings about it. The weeks transpired. I established a rhythm. Awake early, shop by 8. Around 6 o'clock home, seeking something easy, sleep. On weekends, I'd embark on lengthy trips, venturing far beyond the city limits where the roads flattened and cleared, allowing me to accelerate sufficiently that my thoughts momentarily ceased. This was more beneficial than many other things. During the initial weeks, Danny took on more responsibilities than he should have. I acknowledged this debt by telling him I would reciprocate. He replied that I would do the same, which was likely true. The conclusion arrived on a Thursday in March, around 4 months after my departure from that apartment for good. I completed the necessary paperwork and exited the building into cold, gray air, standing on the steps for a moment. It was over, 6 years, over. I navigated back toward the shop. Without intention, I found myself on Halstead. The sign was still hanging, advertising a different production now, featuring an unfamiliar name. Jace wasn't listed anymore. Instead, another act I was unaware of was performing that weekend. I drove past leisurely, not searching for anything in particular. I realized I merely required a glance at an ordinary building on a common street. Words in black on a whiteboard, nothing more than that. I continued driving. The store was tranquil upon my arrival. Danny was tinkering with an antique 10-speed bike in the rear, a diligent restoration project he had undertaken for a collector. The radio played softly. It always did in winter, emanating a mix of chain oil and cold air flowing through the back door. I hung my coat, moved towards my workbench. There was a note on my toolbox from Danny. It indicated a customer had phoned regarding a custom build, decent budget, eager to discuss possibilities. Typical Tuesday morning tasks. I jotted down the particulars in my notebook and worked uninterruptedly throughout the day. As the light outside turned gray and temperatures plummeted, I could hear the wind battering against the front windows. For a moment, I thought of Christine, not her actions, but A few years ago on a Sunday morning, we had ridden together along the lake front, stopped for coffee, and she had laughed at a joke I made. It was just a trivial jest, but the way she looked utterly content is what lingered. I don't understand why that's the memory that remained. I set aside my tools, turned off the workshop light, secured the door, and walked to my truck by myself. My hands were still, but it still ached.